Swing and a drive.
Welcome to Red, White, and Blue Jays, the podcast home of Blue Jays Fans UK, a group connecting Blue Jays fans around the UK and beyond, and telling their story. And now, here's the host of Red, White, and Blue Jays, Steve Hunter.
Hi guys, welcome to episode 47 of Red, White and Blue Jays, and the Blue Jays season is over for another year, just as we got excited with those champagne corks going off in the Blue Jays clubhouse. It's another disappointing postseason, and we are here today to look back over the season with a bit of a season review and to talk about that press conference that happened only a few days ago. And to do that with me today, really warm welcome to my guest, Rob Fay, previous broadcaster on the Vancouver Canadians broadcast, now at CKN 980 in Vancouver. Rob, brilliant to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Well, I have to say one of my best friends is English, so as soon as this is done, I look forward to letting him know. He's a Newcastle fan. I'm a Sunderland fan, so we're friends by osmosis.
Amazing. So have you been over to the UK at all? Have you come this way to watch?
So we were just about to go, my wife and I, to the UK, and then COVID broke out. We actually didn't get our refund from a hotel in London. That's how close we were to coming over, and we'll be there at some point. But man, I'm itching to get there because I've heard nothing but great things.
Would love to have you. It's fun. We've got a bit of a parallel story because we were out in Vancouver 2 summers ago. And I got caught up in COVID. They tested me on arrival and my test came back positive. And so I spent 10 days in a downtown Vancouver hotel. Yeah, I've talked about it loads, so I won't bore everybody else with it. But yeah, that's my bit of a parallel story to you. So let's just ask you, Sunderland, how did that one come about?
All right. So I record a video game at EA Sports. It's NHL hockey. I'm one of the voices on the video game, and I've been there for years. And it was a really simple introduction to Sunderland. They had a bunch of jerseys that they were clearing out from FIFA, which was just down the hallway. And I got a team signed Sunderland jersey. Didn't know anything about them. Thought, you know what? If I was ever going to start supporting a team, this might be the catalyst to do it. And then wouldn't you know it, when I called my friend and told him, I said, "You'll never believe it. I got a team signed Sunderland jersey." He couldn't have been more pissed off because he's a huge Newcastle fan. And it ended up, we would get up early Saturday, watch the games. And for some reason, Sunderland's got a terrific track record against Newcastle. So I think we're undefeated in our last 8. But of course, Newcastle stayed up. We went down, and then we went down some more. So it's going to be a while before we get there. But maybe this is the season where we get close.
Yeah, maybe. And it's definitely a hotbed of football up in the northeast there. Very passionate followers of their teams. And certainly the rivalry between sort of Middlesbrough, Sunderland, Newcastle is huge. You've joined in a good little group of teams there. Now, just tell us a little before we get into the J stuff. I'd love to know a little bit about you. I've done a little bit of research, and there's some really interesting things that you've got involved in. But just give us a little bit of an introduction to you, your work at the Canadians, and other stuff that you've got involved in. That would be great.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Toronto, which is where my love with the Toronto Blue Jays began. I moved out to Vancouver when I was 20. So I'd like to think myself as half Torontonian, half Vancouverite when I think of the math, even though it's a little heavier on the Vancouver side. But my affection for the Blue Jays has always been there. So after a couple of years of bartending and doing things that you do in your 20s, I ended up linking up with the Vancouver Canadians, which was really a dream come true for me because eventually the Vancouver Canadians became an affiliate of the Toronto Blue Jays, and that was in 2011. So that really started to, just integrate me with, getting the opportunity to see players that I used to grow up on, like meeting Jesse Barfield and Tony Fernandez and Roberto Alomar, and those, names to me from my past. It was unbelievable that I was having conversations with them in the future. And also at the same time, I was getting to build relationships with future Blue Jays like Aaron Sanchez and Marcus Stroman and Alek Manoah. I mean, I remember driving Alek Manoah in Boise, Idaho in my stupid convertible car. It was Adam Kloffenstein, Alec Manoa, a couple others in the backseat, and me. And I just thought to myself, as I'm watching these guys break through into the major leagues, get traded, what have you, that I had a bit of a connection to all of them. So of all the things that I've done in my life, own restaurants, bartend, got my barber certification, the one thing that I hold nearest and dearest to my heart is the opportunity to broadcast baseball. I did more than 1,000 games, and some of them were better than others, but it was an opportunity to at least, immerse myself in what is a wonderful baseball culture.
Yeah. When did you finish at the Canadians? When was your last broadcast?
It was actually leading into the pandemic, and
Right.
it was a heartbreaking thing to do because I had heard rumors at the time that Major League Baseball, with all the realignment, was going to make Vancouver a full season team. So going from 76 games to whatever it is, 132 or something along those lines, that was when I looked at my wife and I said, this might be my chance to get out of here, because I have a kid in grade 12, another kid in grade 11. They needed me after me being gone for 14 years of their childhood. And I just thought, with those real formative years where they were going to become adults and figure out what they were going to do in real life, that maybe it was better situated if I was at home instead of being in,
Sure.
all across the Northwest. So that was it. And luckily for the Canadians, they found themselves a tremendous replacement in Tyler Zickel, who I admire greatly, but there's not a season where I don't miss certain elements of the baseball, because it really is a family environment, and seeing these guys go up to the Toronto Blue Jays or whatever major league team they get to is really something endearing.
Yeah, we'd hoped to get to the Nat Bailey Stadium when we came out to Vancouver. We had tickets for a game, and of course I was stuck in our hotel, but they were very kind enough to give me a little shout out on the broadcast, which was very, very kind of them. So one day we will come back out west and definitely come and see you guys in
Well,
that
let
part
me
of the
know when
world.
you're going. I'll pull up a seat beside you.
Oh, I would love that, Rob. Yeah, I would love that. And this would probably could be an appropriate moment in terms of my connection with you. So, really good friend of mine, Ruth, who lives in West Vancouver. She said, you've got to talk to Rob. Please get him on your pod. And there you go. There's the connection. So it's really, I think you're my first guest where we've gone over to the West Coast. So this is probably the biggest time difference that I've had on the pod. So really cool. Yeah. So great to have you with us. You've already mentioned about your barber skills. Where did that come from? What was that drive?
I used to cut the player's hair.
No way.
Yeah, minor league baseball, you don't get a lot of money, and it's not till you make it to the major leagues where you get enough to truly support yourself. So there'd be some guys that be kind of wandering around aimlessly, and I'd just be like, hey man, I'd love to try it. And I wasn't the greatest at it. Like, nobody walked out feeling better than when they walked in. But what happened was, during COVID, shortly after I left the Canadians, it was an opportunity for me to have some time on my hands, which I hadn't had for years. So I went to the best school in Vancouver. I paid the $10,000 that it took to get into the program. And
Wow.
what was interesting is I did the evening course. So I did it from 6 to 9:30, would get on my scooter, run up the street, and then do a late night sports radio show 5 nights a week. So when I was done, I got my barber certification. I've worked at local barbershops around town. I cut 10 to 12 people's heads a day. Sometimes I'll go down to the downtown east side and give haircuts for free to those in need. But more than anything, I just wanted to keep busy, and I always loved cutting hair. So to me, there's a real distinguished allure to being a barber. So I wanted to get involved in that.
Yeah. Well, if I come back out, I'll make sure that I, leave my hair a little bit long and get that sorted out when I'm with you.
I'll be there. I'll be ready.
That'd be so cool. Right. Let's just dive then into hopefully this isn't going to be too depressing, because we want to find some lighter moments in this, but probably the best place to start is just in terms of, let's look back over the 2023 season, expectations that you had coming into this year, and sort of versus the reality of what we've seen. What's your sort of opening take on how the Jays have performed in 23?
Well, look at it from a couple of different angles. Let's start with it offensively. We'll get to the pitching staff, which I think was pretty self-explanatory. But when you looked at, the fact that you had Vladimir Guerrero, you had Bo Bichette, they went out and, of course, got, additions like Kevin Kiermaier and Dalton Varsho, I thought they were really nice complementary pieces to what was turning out to be a pretty interesting core to this team. You add a veteran like Brandon Belt, you go out there and, that you've got George Springer locked in for a couple more years. And really, you were thinking that 1 through 6, this might be the best lineup in the American League. And again, there might be some analytic out there that prove me different, but, just on name notoriety, you look at 1 through 6 and you think to yourself, boy, this is a pretty formidable out. So you get to the season, it starts rumbling, and the one thing that I noticed really early on was Vladdy. Vladdy just seemed out of sorts. There were flashes of brilliance, but man, were there moments of mediocrity, and you just were hoping that he would be the guy that would take the next step. And I'm not just talking about in home runs, but we're talking about solid contact and all the little things that you need to do, because really, the deficiencies in the Blue Jays offense and maybe the first 25 to 30 games were really masked by how well, Chapman was playing at third base and hitting the cover off the ball. I mean, he's hitting over 400 for the first couple of weeks of the season. And Matt Chapman, to me, is an elite third baseman, which breaks my heart that they're not going to take a run at him. I don't know. Again, we'll get to that later because I have some conspiracy theories on that. But really, I just looked at this lineup and I thought to myself, Steve, this is a team that should easily be a 90-win team. Offensively, 90 plus. And you just never felt like this team truly got everything rolling at the same time. And that to me was the first indication. The other one being with runners in scoring position, which was really an Achilles heel for them the entire season.
Yeah. Clearly, I think everybody thought, based on, the last couple of seasons where the offense has been so strong, I think if we were all been betting people, we would have definitely put our wages down on the offense being the strong point of the team, and pitching perhaps be the slight question mark, because that has been a little bit up and down over the last couple of seasons. It didn't turn out that way. I mean, how surprised were you about our starting rotation being so strong and healthy on the whole? Take the Manoah situation to one side, but the rest of the guys performed really well.
Well, let's think about it. We needed 2 bounce-back seasons. We needed one from Jose Barrios, and we needed one from Yusei Kikuchi, and we got them, both of them. So realistically, if you think you have 4 cylinders rolling with Bassett, Barrios, Kikuchi, and Kevin Gausman, who to me is forever going to be a Cy Young candidate, although I think he was the second best pitcher on the team this year. Alek Manoah was really the one where you just couldn't figure out how he went from the penthouse to the outhouse so quickly. And, people would speculate that there was, again, definitive moment in his season obviously came when he hit who he hit, and I think mentally that took him out for a couple of games, but he had just been spinning his tire in the mud the entire season. And I think the frustrating part for the Blue Jays were the fact that I think last season they knew he wasn't optimal. He wasn't in shape, but he just kept racking up wins. So what do? If it ain't broken, you don't fix it. But he came to camp this year not in better shape, potentially in worse shape. And that for me was really a telltale sign in the fact that the Blue Jays kind of gave him that get out of jail free card. Okay, maybe that's just who Alec is. And then all of a sudden, when reality hits and the sophomore jinx applies, it's really tough to get a player like that back on track. So it just kind of felt like it continued to veer off the side of the road, and it ended up in the ditch in Buffalo.
Yeah, it totally did. And there's obviously all the reports about him not turning up to camp and not happy with the decision and all that sort of stuff. Do you think the pitch clock made much difference in terms of his performance? I just wonder whether he probably is the one who struggled most with it.
You know what? I think there's something to that. I wouldn't know unless I talked to Alec myself to see if there was pressure. But yeah, the pitch clock's an interesting beast because there's certain guys that love to work quick. Like I look at Kevin Gausman and I think that's a guy who the pitch clock was built for. Chris Bassett is built for the pitch clock. Alek Manoah is kind of like a lazy walk on a Sunday every once in a while. He'll get you strikes, but he wants to do it on his time. And he's also got a mental game. He loves the chess match with guys stepping in and out of the box. So I don't know if that took that much away from him. But reality is when you see a pitcher that's missing up and he's missing away, it almost looks like it's rushed and he hasn't gone through his process. So yeah, I think there might be a little bit to that. I think Alec, knowing him, having spent time with him in Vancouver, is a really emotional guy. Like when it's good, he's great. And when it's bad, I think he gets a little bit flustered. And, you know, I think the reality of people starting to figure him out, there was finally a scouting report on Alek Manoah as opposed to him catching teams off guard like he did in his rookie season. I just think teams made the adjustments and he didn't, and he got caught.
Was he the right choice for the opening day? Do you feel? I know hindsight's an amazing thing, but But at the time, do you feel that was the right decision?
Absolutely. I mean, the guy's in Cy Young consideration. You can't not give that start. I mean, I always think rotations are interesting beasts. I mean, they're great for the first time through, and then all of a sudden you look at different scenarios and you're thinking, boy, I wish I had this guy here. But yeah, I mean, you tip your cap to him. I think even Kevin Gossman and Chris Bassett would agree that that's your guy on opening day that you start.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so offensively, I mean, it's hard to put your finger on what's actually happened, and we've talked about it a lot on this podcast, and talk with other fans, and we've all debated in terms of what's the strategy. Has this been a player's attitude thing? Has this been a breakdown in terms of the coaching staff that John Schneider's got behind him in terms of the batting? I mean, why do you feel we've had so many players that really have struggled this year? It's not like you normally get one or two maybe, but to have a whole crop of them really struggle on the offense. What do you think is going on there?
I'm going to preface this by saying I'm friends with a lot of guys on that coaching staff, so it's going to be tough for me to say some things here, but I will. I think when you have a rookie head coach, or pardon me, I should call it manager, pardon me, in John Schneider coming into just his second season. Guillermo Martinez is another guy who's young and aspiring. When you've got all these guys that are still kind of figuring out their own way, and then you've got some elite hitters that are looking for more than just a guy to flip them some BP ahead of the game, I think there's challenges there. You can only rely on analytics so much. So, Ross in his post-game or post-season press conference had mentioned things like, we've just got to get them more data quicker and things along those lines to support them. At the end of the day, you need to step into the box and hit that slider. You need to be able to hit that fastball up and in. You've got to know the situations. And these guys are pros, but I know, having been around a ballpark, nothing is more advantageous to a hitter being able to go up to a coach and say, hey, walk me through this, or what are you seeing, and things like that. And to me, that's where Don Mattingly was really the X factor here. Like, one of the greatest hitters of this generation is sitting there right on the bench, available to you. And you've got Guillermo Martinez, and I'm sure he didn't want to step on his toes. But if I was at 10,000 feet to look down and just look at that coaching staff, I mean, Pete Walker's been there for a while, which is part of the reason I felt like there was stability there. I think Jeff Ware in the bullpen was great. Part of the reason the bullpen was so effective. I think the pitching kind of took care of itself. But you've got a manager that never hit in the major leagues. You've got a hitting coach that never hit in the major leagues. And then you've got one of the best hitters of the generation kind of just plugged in the background as a bench coach. To me, it just felt like there was a lot of information. The old guys probably were like, yeah, sounds good. The young guys were probably overwhelmed by it all. You need that one Yoda, that one person who can break it down. And that's supposed to be your hitting coach. And I just don't know if Guillermo Martinez has the depth to be able to do that.
Do you think there will be some changes there? Well, we'll talk about the staff and, all that happened in Ross's press conference, but do you think in terms of there's going to be some changes in that arena because of the struggles they've had?
Well, if you'd asked me that 3 days ago, my opinion is a little bit different than what it is this conversation, because when Ross Atkins tapped John Schneider to come back in 2024, I think that was the first of a handful of surprises from that press conference. And trust me, I love John. Side note here, I was the ordained minister at the wedding of John Schneider to his wife. So I've got a really strong connection to the manager of the Toronto Blue Jays. So if there's one guy that's going to trumpet a guy, even in his darkest moment, it will be me. But I'm also, true to the brand of, trying to dissect this team as best as possible. I just say you have to go and get some help. You have to go, like John Schneider bringing in Don Mattingly, to which he said he was the person that brought in Don Mattingly. Fantastic. I don't know if Don Mattingly would be back in 2024. I think there's opportunities as a manager he might take. New York would come to mind. But reality is I don't think you can go out there and develop anymore. I don't think you can go out there and get another young guy to come in and kind of ease his way into the major leagues. Get somebody with experience. Get a former Blue Jay to come in if you have to, that's got, 5-10 years under his belt, that can be a true hitting coach. Analytic is great, but analytic is a crutch. You need somebody that can walk you through the highs and lows and also understand, Steve, what it's like to go through hitting a baseball 162 games of a season. I mean, There's highs, there's lows, there's ebbs, there's flows. There's so many things that aren't in analytic that need to be remembered when you're walking a player through his slumps and his streaks.
Yeah. we'll talk about the analytics. It's something I'm really intrigued by, and I think we've heard so much about it. I did hear Buck Martinez say the other day just about Schneider, and I want to quote him right. He said this: John Schneider is going to be one hell of a manager, and his cards are, definitely on the table in terms of Schneider doing well. And I think when he came in after Charlie Montejo, everybody was excited because he did appear to be, in terms of his early games, particularly in the first season, much more aggressive in terms of base running and all that sort of stuff. It just felt like there was a little bit more teeth to the team than we saw under Charlie. But it seems to have ebbed away slightly, and I wonder where this analytical mindset has sort of been too loud a voice in his mind.
Well, if I could just speak candidly, and I think you could even make reference to this to Charlie in some capacities as well. There's essentially just a handful of managerial jobs in the major leagues, like period. Sure. It's one of the most coveted jobs on earth. And when you get that opportunity, I mean, you're not really in 2023 going to deviate away from what the boss tells you to do, unless you're a guy that's got 20 years. I don't know how many people go up to Bruce Bochy and tell him what to do, because again, he's got that kind of experience. You could say the same with Dusty Baker. I mean, these are a few of the guys that embrace analytic, but also understand what it's like to manage people. You get a younger generation of coaches, especially the previous two that have come in managerial positions for their first time ever, neither of them with major league experience as a player. And I think it's really hard for them to go into a major league environment and not want to make sure that they're appeasing the guy that brought them in, because they know how coveted this situation is and how rare it would be for them to get another opportunity unless they, knock it out of the park. So I can understand why John Schneider has evolved as a man, and I can understand how he might have de-evolved as a manager. I think he's a great human being. I think the media love having conversations with him off to the side, but I think it's a lot easier to be the groomsman than the groom certain times. And the reality is when John Schneider was the bench coach and Charlie was taking the hits, it's real easy for him to look like a good guy. But now John Schneider's taking those hits, and there's no buffer between him and the media and him and the decisions. Yeah. So for me, the biggest challenge here is, can John Schneider evolve? Because I can tell you this, over 162 games, you can put the analytic aside. Nobody believes that Ross Atkins doesn't go and have conversations with that coaching staff. There's no possible, he should be fired if he doesn't. Because the reality is you have to have that connection. But it's clear coming out of the season that Ross has a real disconnect with this coaching staff. And I think a lot of that has to do with times where he's come down, set a lineup, or at least been privy to a lineup, said, maybe you should do this, and it's backfired. I mean, this isn't a sub-90 win team, but John Schneider can only do so much. And I think he makes a lot of the decisions. But there's, to go back to the Barrios decision of the playoffs, you could sell me a bridge in Florida before I would buy the fact that Ross Atkins wasn't a part of that conversation. And that's John Schneider's biggest challenge in 2024 is, can he still lead without having the front office in his ear, which nobody believes they aren't.
Totally. And I think the whole sort of analytics, baseball operations, and it's not just the Blue Jays. I mean, this is common across major league teams, so we're not talking about something that the Jays are doing something different to everybody else. But it seems to me that that line of communication between front office down to the dugout, there is some massive dysfunctional disconnect between those guys. And we'll unpick what Ross said, but there does seem to be this break in the chain somewhere where they are either not saying the truth or they're not telling us the whole story. And it feels like somebody's going to have to pay for that. But at the moment, we don't know who that's going to be or how that's going to play out.
Of the three available firings that would appease the masses, you've got the president, you got the general manager, and you got the manager. Ross is the easiest of the three to let go. Like, realistically.
Do you think Mark will do that, though? I mean, he's the guy who brought him in. There's such a close connection between the two guys.
Yeah,
Do you think
Mark
he would
is
do
an
that?
interesting guy. Mark Shapiro is a very business-oriented guy, and I think the guys in the upper brass at Rogers really like Mark Shapiro.
Sure.
I mean, he's been able to help them develop Dunedin. He's along with Paul Beeston, of course. He's been able to help redevelop Skydome, now known as Rogers Center, into a ballpark that actually is starting to look like a ballpark. And I don't think Rogers at any point is going to turn around and say, Mark, you're not our guy. There's too many things pending for them to get rid of Mark Shapiro. But Mark's also got to understand that he's got the perfect length of tenure for Ross Atkins to say, hey, this isn't working. I mean, yes, they've been to the postseason under Mark Shapiro. The problem is the zero that goes beside the postseasons when it comes to the time under Ross Atkins. So I would say if you were ever going to do it, this would probably be the year to do it, because I think between the disconnect that we can feel between the front office and the coaching staff and all the other unsuccessful moments within the Blue Jays history, if you don't do it now, you're never going to do it. And I just think there's enough talent out there that you could probably go out there and have some success by finding a person to replace him.
Yeah, well, let's see where that goes. Let's just get back onto the Jays, because I just want to sort of finish off on those guys. Obviously, we've got a load of free agents disappearing or potentially disappearing over the I was going to say over the summer, over the winter. What do you think any of them will be considered as options going forward? I mean, Ross talked to them a little bit in the past tense, but I'm not sure that's quite what he meant. But do you see any of those guys potentially coming back?
You know, Kevin Kiermaier is an interesting guy because I think you can get him at probably a pretty good price tag. I think Matt Chapman's going to want to hit a home run on his next contract because it's his big contract, the one that you hope to retire your grandkids with. And I think there's going to be some suitors for sure for a person that can play third base as well as him. So I don't see him coming back, and I don't see the Blue Jays getting into this as well. So I would think of the names that are out there, and there's just a handful of them. Kevin Kiermaier is an interesting one. And, you know, when you think of pitching, I don't know. I don't see them really making runs at any of those guys, to be honest. Kevin Kiermaier, if the price is right. But aside from those guys, I actually believe in Ross's exit interview and the fact that he was probably assuming those guys in the past tense. I don't think the Blue Jays really need them. Part of the reason you got to remember here is you've got two mega contracts on the horizon. I mean, Bo and Vladdy, that clock is ticking and it's coming up, and neither of those guys aren't going to want less than market value. And, you know, that's a whole different conversation if I think they should both be back. But the reality is that's got to be a part of the conversation, because you got two guys in that order with a payroll that's already pretty significant that are going to be whoppers of contracts.
Yeah. Do you think there is any chance the Jays would consider trading either one of them?
You'd have to back up the Brinks truck to do it as far as, you know, opportunities to, you know, kind of make your team a contender right away. I think Bo's the untouchable. I mean, realistically, I think Bo Bichette is a consistent megastar. He's going to be that kind of player for the next 10 years. I think he's actually the franchise guy. Vladdy's got a little more flair. He's got a little more panache. He's got the name notoriety, obviously. Well, as does Bo. But Vladdy's an interesting one. I had heard years ago that he was never going to re-sign in Toronto. I had heard that back as early as 2019, that he was not long for this organization, that he was obviously brought into this organization. He was going to go through this organization, but he was never going to sign that big long-term contract with Toronto. Again, that is all rumor and speculation, but I got that from some pretty good sources when he was young and upcoming, that this is a guy that wants to play in the States. That, yeah, it's a great story while he's in Toronto that he's got dual citizenship, but Vladdy wants to play under the brightest of lights. And I don't know if Canada and Toronto can offer him that. So heart-wrenching, because we've obviously all attached our hearts as Blue Jay fans to Vladimir Guerrero Jr. But if you were to ask me who's more expendable and who I think you could get a great return on, knowing that might be an element to it, I got to think Vladdy would be that guy.
Yeah. And of course, the third man in the trio who had somewhat dropped off the radar a little bit at the beginning of the season, but had a really good run in the last little while coming into the postseason, was obviously Cavan Biggio. Could you see him being, you know, particularly with obviously Wick going, a potential second baseman on a day-by-day basis? Or do you think they would still... Because he has a real value, doesn't he, in terms of utility? He can virtually play anywhere. I'm just wondering whether they would want to sacrifice that for him at second, or whether do you think he would still move around the team a bit?
I think there's two things to take into factor here, Stephen. The first one is he saved his tenure as a Blue Jay with the second half of the season because he was abysmal in the first half, and I think nobody can disagree with that. But for those around the organization, he is absolutely a leader within that clubhouse. Like probably one of the one of the biggest alphas within the entire organization. He comes in, he puts his work in. He's a pro's pro. Extremely liked by the players, extremely liked by the coaching staff. So, I mean, Witt's got better numbers. I mean, I would like to think across the board, you've given up 35, 40 points in the batting average from last season. But I think when you see the versatility of Cavan Biggio, when you think of what he did in the second half of the season, I think there's still some meat on the bone there, and maybe he needs that opportunity. But the problem with Cavan is he is who he is. And I think he's nearing his ceiling as a player. And that's problematic because if you want an everyday second baseman, I don't know if he's a guy, but I think Cavan Biggio is a fantastic platoon guy and a guy that Ross and the Blue Jay way loves because you can put him into about 6 different positions and he don't lose much defensively.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The gaps that I sort of think we probably got going through the offseason, obviously third with Chapman going, I think need another outfielder, particularly with Kimar going and somebody at DH. They seem to be the 3 obvious gaps. Any others that you think we need to be filling?
I'm curious what we're doing with our catching situation. I think Alejandro Kirk's a great story. I think Danny Jansen is pretty reliable. And trust me, when Danny Jansen was healthy, his pop became apparent. All of a sudden, he had a little juice in the bat. It was great to see. Danny Jansen, if he's healthy, he's obviously the guy that's going to be getting the majority of these games here for the Blue Jays. But as much as I like Alejandro Kirk, I think there's a real challenge with him right now when it comes to the little things. I think there's certain guys that like throwing to him. I don't know if everybody does, but I just felt that this year he's and I don't want to delve too much into the analytic, but you'll see guys that hit 250 and you'll say, okay, well, that's average. But, how was he with the runners in scoring position? How was he in games where the Blue Jays needed that run to get back into a game? Felt like Alejandro didn't answer the bell this year. And, there might be people out there that would prove me wrong, but you think of what he was an all-star the year before. I mean, this is a guy that was, a hitter's hitter. But I go back to the same analogy that I used when it came to Alek Manoah. Is you give Major League Baseball teams a year to get a book on you and a year to scout on you, they're going to make the adjustments. And it seemed like Alejandro in season, I've always said you need to make about 3 adjustments a season to what the other teams are doing against you. It's a chess match, and it is throughout 162 games. I just felt like Alejandro didn't make any adjustments over the course of the season, was what he was. And unfortunately, if he's going to be a legitimate backup to Danny Jansen, he's going to have to do some real serious things, more than just the pot belly. He's going to have to make some hitting adjustments to what teams are doing to him right now.
Yeah. And how did we miss Danny? Oh, man.
Oh, boy. Yeah. Big time.
Terrible. Really, really missed him. David Schneider, obviously, big story through the year. A fun story. It's just extraordinary little run he had when he first came in, getting all those homers, getting the records, bits and pieces. Was it just a little flutter? Did you see realistically him coming back?
Boy, I saw him in Vancouver and would not have thought him a prospect at all. So the fact that he made it to the major leagues is extraordinary and the hugest feather in his cap possible. The fact that he had the impact the way that he did with the Blue Jays in those first weeks with the team is really stuff of movie make. It's stuff that you would put on a script for a movie. Yeah. But the reality is Davis Schneider is a kid at 25 next season that is, he's labeled a second baseman. But I got to think he's probably third on the depth chart. And what is he going to do in the offseason to truly get himself into form? Because as great as we saw him in the first week, he was also over 30 later in the season.
Yeah.
So I think he's a great story. I just don't think he's a long-term part of this organization. And people are going to hate me for saying that. But it's great that he came up, took some pressure off of some other Blue Jays that were struggling at the time, because all eyes were on Davis Schneider. But if you ask me if he's a huge piece of the puzzle for 2024, he's not in my estimation.
No, I'd agree on that. I think Right. Let's just recap on the two postseason games against the Twins. Obviously, scoring again was the major factor, but let's just really drill down to what happened in game two because it is the big talking point. Right decision, wrong decision. When do you go with your gut and what you're seeing in front of you and what's happening on the field compared to the information flows we've already sort of talked about potentially coming from the background? The role of the manager. Rob, give us your best on unpicking all of that lot.
All right, so there's two trains of thought here. Let's say John Schneider comes and gets Jose Barrios. Kikuchi comes, gets him out of the jam, and does not give up any of those runs and goes 3 scoreless. Are we even having this conversation? We should be, because regardless of the outcome of that situation, you don't take him out in that moment. I mean, think of all the factors here. Think of the fact that he's pitching against his former team. He had resurrected his, tenure as a Blue Jay with what he did in 2023 and was pitching what many said was probably the best outing of his entire season. How on earth do you take him out? So it doesn't matter if Kikuchi comes in and absolutely blows it up, or he comes down and is just as good as Jose Barrios. You still don't take Jose out in that situation because you think of the pitch count. 47, was it? I think it was 47.
Late 40s, certainly.
Ironic that I'm guest number 47 on your show. And you also think back to just the ebb and the flow, because I can tell you this, and I never played professionally, but even when I was playing in college and what have you, when you see a guy that's rolling, you're playing center field or you're playing third base or you're catching what he's throwing, you feel good. Like, it makes you feel like you're in a game, like you've got it there. And I can only imagine what the players on that field must have thought when John Schneider had tipped his finger to the bullpen before he got to the mound. That's something I don't think a lot of people talk about, Steve, is the fact that he didn't go out there, have a conversation with Jose Barrios to let Jose and the infielders make a case to keep him in the game. That decision was made before he got to the mound. And that, for me, is, as a player, that's the gut punch. Is sometimes you'll see a manager go out, because it was the first visit, an opportunity to go out there and be like, listen, man, everybody's telling me I should be taking you out, but fuck it. This is the playoffs, man. This is why we're here. This is, we're here to win a World Series. You good? And give him the chance to look you in the eye, man to man, and be like, I got this. I know what the numbers say. I know what the analytics says, but damn it, we're good. I got this. Then John Schneider turns around. He might face the music from the ownership, or he might face the music from the guy that hired him. But you know what he gained? The respect of everybody on the field. And that, to me, as a manager, trumps any lashing that I'm going to get from my GM. I'm going to get fired either way. Yeah. So I might as well go out doing the stuff that I want to do as a manager. And the thing that breaks my heart is John Schneider is a lifelong catcher. If there's one position that a guy plays that should know that decision better than anybody, it's a guy that caught for his entire minor league career. So that, to me, is the heartbreaking thing, is the fact that the decision was made, but John Schneider pointed to the bullpen before he crossed the chalk line. That's where I couldn't agree with the decision. You got to let that pitcher plead his case and let him at least have the opportunity to convince you otherwise.
I mean, the photos afterwards, there's, that classic photo of Brice leaning up against the dugout railing as the Twins are celebrating. There was the moment actually during the game where he appeared to go up to Schneider and almost console him in terms of, I understand why you had to make that call. I mean, just amazing credit to Jose to be able to handle all of that in that way.
But isn't that all telling? Like, this is what makes me not believe what Ross Atkins was saying at his end of the season press conference, is why on earth would Jose Barrios go up to John Schneider and say, it's okay, big fella, if he thought that it was John Schneider's decision and decision alone to make? I think everybody in that dugout knows what was at play there. I think everybody, and really the body language tells the story. I mean, you don't have to have Ross Atkins verify it. The guys in the dugout knew. The guys that were surrounding Jose Barrios before Schneider made his way up the hill, they knew. And John Schneider's body language walking to the mound was different than it usually was. He knew that he had to do something that he didn't want to do. So we may never get the truth. because I don't think John Schneider's the kind of guy that will go in front of the camera and in front of the microphone and say, well, that's actually not what happened. Here's what happened, because John Schneider's playing the long game. He wants to be the manager of this team next year and for years beyond. But I don't think, and again, I go back to this thing I've been saying throughout this entire show, I don't think anybody buys what Ross is selling, because body language and even just the action of Jose Barrios going to console John Schneider is all you need to know in that moment.
Sure. Did that moment, though, disguise the reality of what we've struggled? I mean, I think the 2 postseason games really sort of was a summation of what's the whole season has looked like. We have basically struggled to score runs, and while we're all chasing after this Barrios moment, it still is sort of slightly masquerading what is the reality of why we haven't got through.
Well, you think of all the base runners that they left on in the first 4 innings. What was it, 6?
Yeah.
And you sit back and you say, boy, those are opportunities to... I can't remember what 3 or 4 innings it was. It might not have been right out of the chute, but at some point in that game, I don't have the box score in front of me, there were 6 players that were left on over 4 innings, and the Blue Jays cashed in 0 of them. And you think of a leadoff double. I mean, that's a given that guy scores. Like, you have a leadoff double, that is just absolutely unequivocal. But then you see weird things happening, like Varsho bunting and little things that are offering outs to the opposition. You never give a free out to a team. And I used to be a big believer in small ball. I loved it. But and again, it goes back to, well, who called for that bunt? Was that Varsho just having an epiphany in the box thinking maybe I could bunt for a base hit? Is that a directive of Guillermo Martinez and John Schneider saying, hey, we need you to put something on the third base side because we got to move that runner over? Everything that they held blew up in their hand. Everything, every scenario offensively, every opportunity offensively just completely came back to snake bite them. And I just think to myself, you've had 162 games to figure out a way to navigate those waters. It's absolutely sacrilege to bring that into the postseason. And yet the Blue Jays were exactly the same team that they were in the preseason and in the regular season. And it bit them in front of everybody. And trust me, the pitching with the Minnesota Twins is good. It's not great. And the fact that they made them look great was really a part of the problem.
Yeah. And the Vladdy pickoff, what did you make of that?
Awful. Well, again, you said it.
Yeah, beyond it being awful.
Oh, God, their base running all season has been atrocious. And, this goes back to PFPs and things that you're doing. I mean, pitchers understanding how to come off the mound to field a ball or, catch a ball at first base in motion, and all the little things that you're doing for hours in spring training and hours before the games. Base running at the major league level should be on the list of 100 things to be concerned with, probably 99 or 100. Like, outside of making sure you have enough hot dogs for the fans, this is probably something you should worry about the least. And yet the Blue Jays absolutely walked around with a gun in their pocket and just continue to shoot themselves in the foot in the season. I think of Bo coming around third. You can see Rivera with both hands clearly up. And everybody says, well, Bo's got to gamble, and it was a great play from Correa. You think of who's in the on-deck circle in that moment, you stay at third base. And then Vladdy, just a complete brain fart. And you talk about the timing play. I've actually got a second thought on this, but realistically, you cannot get picked off at second base. Of all the bases to get picked off, that's the one you don't get picked off at. So that for me was frustrating. But here's a question for you, not to flip the interview on its side and make you the person answering the questions. Steve, riddle me this. We bashed the Houston Astros for years because they were banging drums in the corridor and they were giving their hitters information that made them better than everybody else. And we scolded them for years. They lost their GM, they lost their coach, they lost them all. But yet now a pitcher can wear a device in his ear or in his hat that allows him to know what's going on in a timing play that is conveyed to him from the dugout.
Yep.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but how is that different?
Yeah. It's absolutely it's those soft signals, isn't it, to across the diamond that happens. And I think
but a signal is one thing. It's another thing to physically say to a pitcher on a mound in a moment of a playoff, by the way, this play is on, because and we've heard it from the players. Correa tips his cap to the dugout. The dugout then conveys that message to the pitcher. The pitcher then knows what to do and exactly turns around, and they get one of the biggest outs of the postseason. I guess just the one thing I'm still trying to wrap my head around in all of this is, hey, great play, good job, Minnesota Twins. But I always thought that this was something that was balls and strikes and what pitches are going. I didn't think that there were pickoffs and timing plays that were allowed to be conveyed from the dugout as well. It just strikes me as I didn't realize what a weapon that is for a pitcher.
Yeah.
And then you look back at the Astros from a couple of years ago who were just trying to get that same information to their hitters, and yet one is scolded and the other it's completely a norm. And maybe I'm in the minority. I just find that strikingly surprising that it's more than just pitch selection that is being conveyed to a pitcher through this pitch track.
Yeah, sure. Although we haven't seen a great deal of that happening through the regular season, I don't think, in terms of that sort of information flow. But who knows? Yeah, who knows? How do you monitor it? Do you think that sort of thing should be reviewable in terms of that play? I mean, it's hard to prove it or deny it either way.
I don't know how you do it. I mean, you've got the catcher who's got devices now. You've got pitchers who've got devices. Like, we actually see them stop play because they can't hear what's going on in their pitch comms, so they go out and get a new one. Like, to me, why not have a hitter have the same thing so that we can all be on level playing fields if we're going to do that? Because it just really struck me as a part of baseball that really never hit me until I saw that particular play. And I thought, boy, what an advantage that must be for a pitcher to have a device that allows him in on a timing play that can change the flow of a game, which it did. So I don't know how you police it. I don't know what you can do unless you just take it out of the equation altogether. But it never hit me until that specific play. And I thought to myself, boy, what an advantage that is.
Yeah, very interesting. You all for robo umps if they come in? Do you like the idea of bringing more technology into the game?
Oh boy, I've always been a supporter of umpires and officials because I know how tough that job is. I always think to myself, if you get 97 out of 100 on a test, you're on the honor roll in school. But if you miss 3 calls in baseball, you might not get an assignment to the postseason. It's tough. And, what is it? Pitch track or whatever it is that gives you the grid that sees how many balls you've missed. It's an imperfect game. And I think there's a lot of umpires that do really good jobs. I think the great equalizer is review. I don't want robots, but if you give each team a couple of chances to really break down a call at a bag, that's fine by me. There's always going to be pitches outside that get called. The only problem now in 2023 is now there's a grid in real time to let every single fan know that guy screwed up. Yeah. Whereas in the past, it was just Billy Martin coming out and losing his marbles.
That's why we loved Gibby so much, because that was half the things that he came out fighting for. So yes, we miss all of that. We miss all that. Okay, Rob, let's just dissect a little bit, just as we sort of come to a close in terms of the press conference. We've covered quite a few comments on it already. Nobody expected a general manager to do what he did in that moment, did they?
Boy, how would I describe this? Ross has been at this long enough to know where the pitfalls are and where the grenades are. And I think he knew in that moment that it just wasn't going to be him that was going to take the heat in real time. It's amazing. There's an old adage, time heals all wounds. And I feel like Ross was almost playing the clock as much as he was playing the media, thinking that, well, today it's white hot, but tomorrow it might be red hot. And by 3 days from now, it might just be smoking in the aftermath. But I just think he lost all credibility with the players, all credibility with the coaching staff by handling it the way that he did. So maybe he won over a couple of article or journalists over the course of that 45 minutes. But if I'm a player and I watch that press conference in its entirety, I'm out on Ross Atkins. If I'm the coaching staff, sure, yeah, Ross, whatever, sounds good. Close the door on the way out. Like, baseball is a really tight circle. And I can tell you, when you're in, you're in. And when you're out, you are out. And I just don't see how Ross made any headway with anybody in that organization. So now you've got a general manager who's on his own island because the media saw right through it. And now the players and the players and the coaching staff are looking at Ross like, screw you. Like, I'm sorry, but that's what it is. If Ross would have went in and said, listen, man, collectively, we looked at that situation and we should have done some things differently. We're going to spend the entire offseason making sure that something like that never happens again. It's on me. I'm the general manager of this team. you know what? It's on John, but I'm a part of that conversation as well. And we will do nothing but work our asses off to make sure that it doesn't do it again. We're going to support Vladdy. We're going to support our core. We're going to do what we have to do to make sure that we can make this a team that doesn't fall in the postseason. It's almost a rallying cry. But instead, he's like, wasn't me. Sorry, man. Like, I'm going to go out and get some support for Vladdy. I'm going to do all the things that you, quote, want me to do. But players can see through that. John Schneider can see through that. And the people in that clubhouse, whether they agreed with everything that John Schneider did over the course of the season, whether it's, Matt Chapman yelling at him for pitching to Shohei Ohtani or bringing in a pitcher at the wrong time, those players still support their manager. And it doesn't matter how good a GM you are. If you screw over the manager, you're out. Because you know what? That guy's in uniform, that guy's on the field, and that guy's my guy. And I'll tell you this, Ross Atkins alienated himself to a level that I don't know if he should be the GM of this team anymore, based on that alone.
Yeah, and it's not ever been the flavor that the Jays have ever gone with in terms of that mindset. I think the managerial 101 is always that you support your man, you support your guys, you even if they screw up, 100%. You get alongside them. But there was just none of that going on. It was the most extraordinary. I was just listening into it, and it was just the most extraordinary thing to listen to. And you could almost sense in the room there was that sense of, is he really saying what he's saying? Because it was just outstanding that how he would put John Schneider under the bus in the way he did.
You took John Gibbons out of uniform, and you just met him at a bar. The two of them, they're strikingly similar. Like, they're both really easygoing guys, super likable, can tell you a million stories, and kind of guy that you'd want to go to bat for and rally for. I don't know Charlie enough, but I will say this, like, John Schneider is salt of the earth, right down to the core. He's one of the nicest men you'll ever meet. In tough situations, not afraid to call out a guy that needs to be called out, and he's a man's man. But at the same time doesn't suffer fools. And I think after that press conference, there's a lot of people that thought John Schneider was made out to be a fool. And that, for me, if I'm John Schneider, that rubs me the wrong way. People are saying, oh, John Schneider should resign. No, he's not going to resign. He's a manager of a Major League Baseball team. But believe you me, there's not a player there knowing John Schneider that's going to look at Ross Atkins and be like, hey, man, great presser. They'd all look at him and be like, what were you doing, man? Like, those are moments where general managers can really become leaders. And he looked like a coward. He looked like a coward, because if you know John Schneider and you know the makeup of that team, that's the last thing you do as a general manager. He completely screwed it. And if anything, maybe I had aspirations of bringing Ross back. After that press conference, I wouldn't.
Nah, not happening. Interesting in terms of a sort of football mindset. We'll often see, particularly with the national side, you get your manager, you get your coaches all together at a press conference at the same time. I don't know whether that is a North American thing where you just bring one out day after day. What wouldn't it have been much more helpful to have all three of them sat behind a table and come clean about what happened?
I'm not sure if I'd have put John Schneider there, but I'm actually a little curious to know why Mark Shapiro wasn't there. Okay. Like, that's one where if Ross is Mark's guy, then Mark in the hierarchy of baseball should probably be beside his guy, all taking share of the blame and all saying that they're working towards the future. The fact that Mark Shapiro doesn't have his presser for an additional week, that's telling to me. And I feel like that was almost a moment where, and maybe there was just logistics. Maybe I'm completely overblowing this, but my thought process was, and I think of hockey, for example, at the end of the year, you'll have your head coach, you'll have your GM, you'll have your president, and they'll do the State of the Union, and then they're all done. The fact that this was staggered, that John Schneider is not available to talk to anybody, the fact that Ross did his presser by himself, and the fact that a week later the president's coming through, it almost makes me feel like Mark Shapiro kind of wanted to see the temperature and how much it would come down with Ross before he went to the podium to make his State of the Union. Like, that to me is that's shady as well. Like, if you're going to go down, then you all go down collectively. You all go down together. And then you turn to Rogers as the ownership group and just be like, listen, we wore the bullets. We took the asteroids to the head, but you know what? Damn it. We've got a great core and we're going to build. And then you just start to sell them again. I'm perplexed as to how they've broken this one down. And if I'm Ross Atkins and I see that to me in my stomach makes me not feel all that confident.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. What do the Jays need to do over the off season to prepare for next year?
You know what? Not hit the panic button and just make sure that they're in on some pretty key players. I mean, you're losing a Gold Glove third baseman. You're losing a guy that was an all-star this year in Whit Merrifield. You're losing a number of key people that I also think were decent in the clubhouse as well. And I think right there, you've got to go out there and be a heavy hitter on the open market. And you've got to be able to sell to those guys as to why Toronto is still a contender. They're in a division that's got a 100-win team in the Baltimore Orioles and a 99-win team in the Tampa Rays. I don't think Baltimore is going to strike lightning twice. I actually think they're a team next year that's going to drop significantly if you look at their build. But I don't think the Yankees are going to be bad forever. I don't think the Red Sox are going to be bad forever. So if you're going to make your run with Vladdy and Bo and this core, while you still got Kevin Gausman, while you still got, Chris Bassett, you go out there and you go after everybody. I don't care if it's Shohei or Mike Trout or whoever it is, you go out and you ball out, because this is that rare window in the American League East where I still think the Blue Jays are right in there. They've got a great bullpen, tremendous starting pitching, and a good core. They're 2 or 3 key pieces away from doing it, and I don't think you hit the panic button. If anything, you go to Rogers and be like, listen, I hate to say this, but we need more money, and let's go out and be a big player. That would be what I would do. I would not break this down. I would not trade anybody. If anything, I would double down and go for it myself.
Yeah, brilliant. Great answer. Your one thing came multiple things, but you answered it brilliantly. Great. Rob, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate catching up with you and just hearing your thoughts and so on. Just remind us of where everybody can find you if they want to follow and so on.
If they want to agree with me, or if they want to rate or debate me, it's always at Rob Fay, which is ROB, F as in Frank A. I got a little plane flying overhead right now. I live right beside an airport. But I just wanted to say right back to you, Steve, thank you for all you do for the Blue Jays community. Twitter can be a heinous place, but it can also be a great place. And I just thought what you did even the other day, putting on your Blue Jays for a longtime fan who's no longer with us. I just think those are the kind of things that bring a community together. And I think what you and everybody's doing to build up the game overseas and even over here is really special. So don't stop. Keep doing it.
Oh, thanks, man. No, I love doing this because it connects people together, and that was the whole mindset of this podcast and the whole Twitter thing and the Instagram was a means of connecting, particularly here in the UK, but it's spread much further afield now. Just people who have a common love for the Blue Jays and the enjoyment that they bring to us normally, but our fandom together is it's a great community, and it's good to be able to stand alongside people who are going through difficult times. So,
and you're keeping the merchandise. You're keeping the merchandise company.
We got a few things. A few things behind me. One or two.
Done, yeah. Well, great. Thank you for the time.
Pleasure. Great to see you. Thanks so much.
Always.
Hey, man. Thank you, Rob. Brilliant. Love that. Really good.
The Red, White, and Blue Jays podcast is a production of Blue Jays Fans UK. If you've got a Blue Jays story to share, let us know. Email us at bluejaysfansuk@gmail.com. And follow along on Twitter and Instagram at Blue Jays Fans UK. I'm your announcer, Jim Langton. Thanks for listening.